We're almost there. At the end of this video, I'm going to leave you with the assignment of planning your first draft. To prepare you, we'll be taking a focus on narrative structure and on essay openings. Let's look at narrative structure now. Defined as the framework that underlies the order and manner in which a narrative is presented to a reader, think of narrative structure as simply how you decide to tell your story. One of the most common narrative structures we see in popular film and TV, and that can also be of use in your personal statement, is the linear time sequence model. Here, we are first introduced to our setting and characters, have a problem arise, go through the rising action as our main character tries to deal with the problem, reach the climax of the narrative where the character either beats the problem or is beaten by it, then the falling action where we see the aftermath of those big moments, and the denouement where everything is tied up, be it through a lesson stated or an implication of future happenings. In the context of a personal statement, this may be an essay that starts off with the writer's first day at the coffee shop. Let's just continue using our earlier example. Then show how they struggle to learn how to use the coffee machine or remember everyone's orders. Next, perhaps the writer reflects on what they did to overcome these challenges by staying at the coffee shop late to learn the machine and making flashcards for how all the various orders were made. We then move into a climactic moment where all the hard work comes together on a particularly busy day when the cafe was undermanned. And finally, reflect on how the experience helped develop not only a sense of independence and agency, but also a long-standing interest in coffee farming culture that they can't wait to explore more of when they get to college, of course. For the most part, other narrative structures we encounter are simply variations of this framework. For example, a flashback narrative is one that may begin at the climax to intrigue us, only to then take us back to the beginning to show us how we got there in the first place. While a circular narrative is one where the characters end their journey where they began, though with having learned or gained something valuable along the way. Here is a list of potential narrative structures to consider. How you decide to structure your narrative will depend on the story you want to tell and who you are as a writer. All of them are good. Remember that you don't need to do anything fancy, and that simple structures that start at the beginning and end at the end have made for some of the most successful personal statements. Chances are it's how you decide to open your essay that will determine what structure you use. Let's take a look at that now. Every essay of this sort contains ideas in the form of insights, reflections, or opinions, and narrative or story. In a broad opening, we begin with a more expansive view of either our ideas or narrative, setting the stage for a zoomed-in examination later on. So, for example, for a broad narrative opening, our hypothetical writer may begin by saying, "Growing up, I'd always stayed away from coffee. I didn't like the smell, or the dirty dregs it left at the bottom of cups. So you can imagine my reluctance last summer when the only job I could find was..." Here we see our writer is giving us a lay of the land before heading into the specifics of what that summer job was like and what it taught them. Whereas for a broad idea opening, they can write, "I'd always thought hard work meant having to carry bales of hay back and forth from a barn, or training for a marathon. It can always seem so extreme in movies and conversation. But hard work can often appear in the smaller tasks that are harder to notice." In this one, we have a moment of reflection straight away, preparing the reader for a narrative showing how that understanding came to be. On the other side of things, we have narrow or in-the-moment openings, where we get into our narrative right away, without a slowing down to introduce everything just yet. In this case, our student might write, "On Tuesday morning, my manager called me to the back room. 'I'm going to need your help today since we're short on staff,' she said, taking a sip of one of the cappuccinos I brewed for the team." Such an essay will later allow for the expanding of narrative context and reflections on responsibility and so on. but it first grabs our attention through a human real-time moment instead. In planning your essay draft, I want you to have a plan for both a potential broad opening essay and a potential narrow opening essay, using whatever prompt and structure you also choose. In your plan, for each paragraph, decide whether you will use it to continue the narrative, and if so, what next stage of the story. Or if you want to have a moment for ideas and reflection, if so, what? Here's an example I made for each: the broad opening and narrow opening, using our student barista, of course. It'll be available in the materials for this module, along with a planning template you can also use. Of course, when we get to actually writing, some of our paragraphs may include moments of narrative and reflection. That's fine. And if you think you already have a sense of where that might take place in your own essay, then mark it in your outline. This is only meant to give you a loose sense of how you expect the reader's experience to flow from start to finish. In summary, narrative structure is how you decide to tell your story. The simplest is the linear time sequence narrative that starts at the beginning and ends at the end, and most of the others are just variations from that. To open your essay, consider between broad openings that begin with setting the scene or a reflection on ideas, or narrow ones that start the action right away. And make two outlines for your essay, a broad one and a narrow, that you then decide between when we get to writing. Use any of the attached materials to help. All right, let's get to it. Finish both outlines, and in the next video, I'll leave you with some final words of advice for writing your first draft. I'll see you at the next stage.